Hello everybody, my name is Jonas. I'm a PhD student in the Sensory Neuroengineering Lab at FAU Erlangen-Nuremberg, Germany. In this study, we looked at audiovisual processing at the fundamental frequency of speech. The fundamental frequency is an important marker for early auditory processing, and in this study we particularly wanted to know if this early auditory processing is already modulated by audiovisual integration and if this correlates with behavioral measures of speech comprehension. One important aspect in human communication is that the brain can process multiple information at the same time. In the context of audiovisual speech, this is referred to as audiovisual integration. Audiovisual integration means that the brain can process visual information such as facial expressions and lip movements and synchronize them with auditory cues at the rate of syllables and words. This then leads to an increased encoding and also an increased reliability of what has been heard. Audiovisual integration mainly happens at the cortical level, namely in the visual and auditory cortex, which can interact and then create projections into higher cognitive areas, such as the prefrontal cortex, to generate actions and generate articulations. You can actually test audiovisual integration here in real time if you close your eyes and try to follow what I'm saying, compared to if you watch my face and watch my lip movements in the right corner while I'm talking. This audiovisual integration has been shown to be particularly increased in challenging listening environments and for hearing impaired people. This is called inverse effectiveness. One study has shown that this inverse effectiveness is, however, not linear. It has sort of a sweet spot at a particular signal-to-noise ratio, in this case minus 12 dB, where this effect becomes particularly salient. On the neural encoding level, audiovisual integration is thought to happen mainly at low frequencies and also in a long-term fashion. One study has shown that following the speech envelope, an important marker for auditory processing, is modulated by visual entrainment at around 250 milliseconds and below 3 Hz. So here we looked at a characteristic group of neural activity, the so-called frequency following responses. As the name already suggests, frequency following responses are phase-locked neural activity to the periodicity of a stimulus. So take an auditory stimulus, for instance, a syllable or a pure tone, and repeat this stimulus a few hundred times, we can see in the measured neural signal characteristic frequencies of that stimulus, for instance at the fundamental and also at higher harmonics. This is because the auditory system is able to track these frequencies at early stages of the auditory pathway in the auditory brainstem and also in the auditory midbrain. In clinical applications, this is used to test the functionality of early auditory processing, but also the fidelity of neural pitch encoding. This has also been shown to be correlated with higher cognitive impairments such as learning impairments and autism. So these frequency following responses are an interesting tool to study the relationship between subcortical processing and cortical processing, and we use this particularly to study audiovisual integration. However, compared to short repeated stimuli, a more natural scenario is continuous speech. And in continuous speech, the fundamental waveform fluctuates around the fundamental frequency. However, this has been shown to also elicit a neural activity at around 10 milliseconds latency. And this activity, similar to the frequency following responses, is also modulated by higher cognitive processes such as attention. So for this study, the research question was, can we measure audiovisual integration at early stages of auditory processing and in particular at the fundamental frequency of speech? There's one interesting study from Musaki et al. Already from 2007 who showed that there is indeed already audiovisual integration for short repeated stimuli, so classical frequency following responses, and this response is particularly visible at the fundamental frequency. They also showed that there is a difference between musicians and non-musicians, but in this case we didn't care about the musicians part, we just wanted to know if we can replicate these results also for continuous speech. To test this hypothesis, we used an audiovisual dataset which contained EEG recordings from 25 participants with 54 trials of around 104 seconds length and 6 trials per AV condition. After each trial, the participants were asked comprehension questions with 4 multiple choice questions and scores 1 to 4 according to the number of right answers. We used the score from the comprehension questions to correlate the behavioral performance to the neural encoding later on. The audiovisual data were drawn from the AV corpus from Behavioural et al. From 2023, which contained English narratives of a male speaker with a fundamental frequency of around 107 Hz and speech files which were presented in the EEG experiment with speech and noise. The noise was created from, on the one hand, an English speaker and on the other hand, a Dutch speaker to compare informational plus energetic versus only energetic masking. There were 3 different audiovisual conditions. One condition was the natural audiovisual condition where the participants could see the natural face of the speaker, and the other ones were abstractions of the edges of the speaker's face, which differed between less and more edges, but for this study we only took 2 different audiovisual conditions, namely the edge condition and the natural AV condition. We then computed 2 features from the speech signal. One should represent the content around the fundamental frequency, here referred to as the fundamental waveform, and the other one represented the higher frequency content of the speech signal between 200 and 4 kHz, and in particular the amplitude modulations in these higher frequencies. The EEG signal was filtered around the fundamental frequency of the speaker's voice between 75 and 150 Hz, and the 2 features and the EEG were then used to compute time-lag ridge regression models to encode the EEG from these 2 speech features and for the different audiovisual conditions. We first looked at the neural encoding scores of the 2 speech features for the different audiovisual conditions. We could not find a significant difference between the 2 audiovisual conditions, the edge AV and natural AV, and also not between the audio-only and the audiovisual conditions. However, we could find a significant difference between the video-only and all other conditions, confirming that there is no significant visual-only encoding at the fundamental frequency. We then looked at the speech comprehension scores and found a significant difference between the natural audiovisual condition and the audio-only condition. However, we did not find a significant difference between the edge AV and natural AV. Again, we found significant differences between all other conditions and the video-only condition. Interestingly, when we looked at the neural encoding scores for the different background speakers, the Dutch background and the English background reflecting energetic versus informational masking, we could find significantly higher encoding scores when the Dutch background was present compared to when the English background was present. However, there was no difference between these 2 background speakers in the speech comprehension scores, suggesting that speech comprehension is more susceptible to an audiovisual integration and the neural encoding might be more susceptible to acoustic markers. However, this effect might also be driven by a higher level cognitive modulation. We finally wondered if there's a relationship between the neural encoding accuracy and speech comprehension. Using linear regression, we found a significant correlation between the neural encoding and speech comprehension performance. When accounting for internal dataset properties, such as repeated measures within subjects, we still found a significant correlation. This also holds when we group the data by the different audiovisual conditions, accounting for condition-specific differences. So to summarize, in this study we tested if there is audiovisual integration already at early stages of auditory processing and in particular at the fundamental frequency of speech. Contrasting the findings from a previous FFR study, we could find no enhanced neural encoding of audiovisual versus audio-only speech. This confirms that audiovisual integration mainly occurs at lower frequencies and longer temporal windows, mainly at the cortical level. However, the neural encoding of the 2 speech features we used here was higher for the energetically masked speaker, in this case the Dutch speaker, compared to the informationally and energetically masked speaker, an English background speaker. And this might indicate already some level of top-down modulation. When we compared the neural encoding accuracy with behavioral performance of speech comprehension, we found a linear relationship which was significant, and this could be an early auditory marker of speech comprehension. With this, I'd like to thank you for your attention and reach out to me if you have any questions.